Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Student Involvement and Careers and Alumni UBC, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all in attendance today. We appreciate you being here to participate in this exciting talk by our alumna, Tamara Osseiran. Please note that this event will be recorded through Zoom and the video will be made available to you after the event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Center for Student Involvement and Careers and UBC's Point Grey campus are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Today, you may be joining us from many places with many different histories, and you can learn more on the traditional owners of those lands at www.native-land.ca. You should be able to see a QR code and a link on your screen and in the chat. Please take a moment to either follow the link or scan the QR code to check in and let us know you're attending today's event. My name is Amir Hariri. I am an Employer and Alumni Engagement Advisor with the CSINC, and I'll be your moderator today. Whilst in our event space, I would like to remind everyone that all members of the UBC community are expected to uphold a respectful environment in which respect, civility, diversity, opportunity, and inclusion are valued. Although we may be interacting off campus in a virtual setting, the expectations for fostering a safe and respectful environment for all remains the same for all students, staff, and faculty. Today's Alumni Office Hour is a partnership with the UBC Hub of 10,000 Coffees and is sponsored by RBC as part of their Future Launch campaign. With 10,000 Coffees, students can connect with a network of over 5,000 other students and alumni to develop their skills and build their network. I'm also on 10,000 Coffees, so don't hesitate to connect with me after this event. As some of you may know, the CSINC supports students throughout your academic journey on campus by connecting you to experiences, resources, and people that will help you achieve your personal and career goals. We do this through a variety of programming, including orientations, mentoring, volunteer and leadership opportunities, and workplace learning. You can visit students.ubc.ca to learn more about our center and services. All of our participants are muted for the duration of the event. We will have a Q&A opportunity in the second half of today's office hour. Some of you have already sent us your questions, and I'll make sure to get to those throughout our Q&A. You're also welcome to either send us your questions through Zoom chat once we start our Q&A, or you can use your mic and camera to ask a question. We always want to hear from you live, so that would be fantastic. Please raise your hand, and we'll do our best to provide you with an opportunity to speak to Tamara. Please keep your questions short and concise, as it will provide us with an opportunity to answer more of them. Okay, I'm now happy to introduce today's speaker, Tamara Osseiran. Tamara is a product designer, strategist, and declutter, passionate about strategy-based design and bringing order to complex systems. After graduating in 2019, Tamara worked steadily in the industry before eventually becoming a product designer at Yahoo, working on building the native experience for Yahoo Finance apps. Previous to that, she led the design efforts at Circus Stream as a user experience designer, working on various projects related to spatial and immersive technology. Tamara is a Lebanese-native who grew up in Saudi Arabia before heading to Vancouver to complete her bachelor's degree at UBC. Though she has a preference for milder and cooler climates, these days you can find her eating some barbecue and enjoying local live music in sunny Austin, Texas. I think you'll appreciate sunny Austin, Texas. If you look at our weather forecast, there's like 14 days of rain coming up, so this is a good time to say that. While pursuing her Bachelor of Media Studies degree at UBC, Tamara was curating her degree and university experience towards a career in marketing. However, during her final year, she decided to make a last-minute pivot into UX design. In today's office hour, Tamara will be sharing her experience of what it takes to be a self-taught designer and the tips and tricks needed to break into the industry with no formal background in design. I'll now give the floor to Tamara. Thank you again for being here today.
Thank you so much for the intro. I'm just going to share my screen. All right.
Perfect.
Just enlarge that. Oops. Is it clear?
Yep. Looks good.
Perfect. Cool. So yeah, to start things off, I'm a product designer and I never formally studied design, nor have I had a design internship. And as Amr just introduced me, as he just said, today I'm going to be talking to you about my story of how I broke into design without a UX background. But before I get started, I'll give a quick intro about myself. I'm Tamara, and as you already mentioned, I'm a UBC alumna who graduated in 2019 from the Media Studies program. I am currently a product designer at Yahoo, designing native experiences specifically for Yahoo Finance. So if you're ever interested in what I'm up to, you can check out the iOS or Android app specifically for finance. On the side, I also like to mentor junior designers. So if you're ever interested, you can contact me also on 10,000 Coffees. I'm very open to sharing my experiences and helping out. So growing up, I've always been fond of technology, the newest devices, the latest software. I loved it all. But I was also very fascinated by media and the impact it could have. Just like many high school seniors, I didn't exactly know what or where any of those interests could lead me into, at least career-wise. So in 2015, I moved to Vancouver to pursue my degree in media studies. And at the time, I thought that this could potentially be the best way for me to dabble my interests in tech while also expanding my learning in media. It was a great program to self-discover and learn because I got to dig into topics like computer science, information studies, and at the same time, media theory. But was this program the one that led me to learn the ins and outs of product design? In some ways, yes, but did it prep me for the industry? No, it didn't, not necessarily. But I mean, I didn't expect that it would because it wasn't a design or human computer interaction focused degree. So my journey to product design wasn't at all a straight shot, easy path as illustrated here. And it actually looked a lot more like this instead. There were many bumps, iterations, switches until I finally managed to get my foot in the door, as they say. So zooming into my experience at UBC, I actually spent a lot of my first 2 to 3 years accidentally taking on volunteering-based marketing roles, whether it be social media work, creative work, or whatever it is. But because of that, I soon boxed myself into thinking that branding or marketing could perhaps be a good fit for me. And this was not because I was passionate about it, but because I had the skills to do it. So I paired my major with a minor in commerce. And at that point, I was really set on taking the route towards digital marketing. And then in my third year, I got an offer at an accounting startup to join as a marketing associate while I finish off my degree. And I thought it was an amazing opportunity and one that would perfectly segue into a full-time role once I graduate. But shortly into that role, I started to discover what UX design was. And I began to realize that maybe marketing isn't for me at all. The reason why I wasn't particularly interested in marketing was because I wasn't fond of the idea of trying to market a product I didn't necessarily care about or believe in. And this is like absolutely no shade to the company specifically, but rather for the role more generally. I was more interested in wanting to be part of the process of creating value in a product instead. So I was set on making that transition into UX design, but I had to figure out how. And if you do the math, at the time I was already in my third year of university with about less than a year for me to graduate. So really there was only 3 ways I could have gone about this. Number 1, complete a boot camp to expedite my journey. Number 2, complete a master's degree in human computer interaction after I finished my degree at UBC, or go the self-taught route. But because I was an international student with a lot of pressure from my parents, I didn't want to spend more time in school. So I went the self-taught route. The only thing is it was me against an already oversaturated and highly competitive industry. At that point, everyone I knew wanted to become UX designers, but many of them had time to find internships, to learn, to build their portfolios before that pressure of post-grad life. So my biggest internal challenge was, how can I stand out to recruiters and companies with no experience or design expertise? So my journey into UX looked a lot like this: research, learning, and applying my learnings by actually doing. For research, a lot of my time was spent trying to figure out what skills I needed to learn and fill to be able to successfully market myself for the role. You'll quickly notice that getting to UX required a lot of marketing skills. And at the time, I looked through companies I dreamed to work for, their job descriptions, and highlighted and compared similarities and common keywords that pop up of skills that were needed and that I needed to learn. One by one, I started learning about the hows, the whats through online resources, blogs, videos, and even books. But in the end, no matter what skills I learned, your portfolio was actually what was needed to demonstrate any kind of hard skills or soft skills you build. So instead of talking to you today about what I learned I needed to learn to get a role in design, I'm going to talk to you today about the biggest obstacle I faced, which is marketing my skills through my portfolio enough to get me hired. There's a real chicken and an egg problem with getting hired as a new designer these days. It's hard to get a job without a good portfolio, and it's hard to create a good portfolio without first having a job. This is a now deleted tweet I came across a couple months ago from a design lead. I believe she works or worked at Expedia. And it says, entry-level designers, I want to see that you have the initiative and foresight to have prior UX design experience from internships or jobs. Class assignments and self-initiated redesigns don't cut it. I want to see real work that you've built and launched for real people. As you begin interviewing, you'll quickly discover that the barrier can be as real as ever, because for many recruiters and design leads like this one, they've set this as a requirement that you must check. But to this I say, because you absolutely can create projects that are good enough to showcase your ability as a UX designer to get you hired. And this does not at all have to be paid projects. It could be self-initiated projects as well. And I know this because my portfolio was filled with projects that did not come from a real client or employer. And the funny thing is, these projects did get me interviews and did get me jobs. So there are actually many ways you can go about creating self-made projects. Number one, the most common and easy way is by solving a problem to an existing app by redesigning it. So at one point in time, ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft didn't exist in Vancouver. I know that they do now, but like back when I did this, they didn't. And during that time, I used to travel back and forth to Austin from Vancouver, mostly taking that 6 a.m. flight. And if any of you have used blacktop cabs, you'll know that most times you book a cab on that app, you'll run into all sorts of reliability issues. So my first UX project was a redesign of blacktop cabs. And in interviews with many Vancouver-based companies, a lot of them really related to this problem and they loved it. The second way of going about project building is by designing something from the ground up based on your own ideas, apps you wish existed. So my second big project on my portfolio was a wish it existed app that was sourced from my struggle of keeping track of the number of jobs that I was applying to. So I designed a job tracking tool called Tabs and shared it on my portfolio. And the truth is about this project is it took a lot of time because it was a design from the ground up, but because it was a design from the ground up, it did a fantastic job filling up my portfolio because it allowed me to show my full design thinking skills from product strategy to execution. And it was actually a project that I presented in one of my interviews that landed me a full-time role. There are, of course, many other ways of going about creating projects for your portfolio without formal experience. And the best part of being a designer is that you can turn your ideas into reality without a developer. But the most important thing when doing these projects is do your redesigns and wish it existed projects in the same way you would do your very best professional work. Really hone in on the details because they all matter. That means do the research, talk to users, come up with as many concepts and document your trade-offs because that is what you will use to highlight your design process and your skills as a problem-solving designer rather than a pixel-pushing one. which leads me to my second big lesson. Storytelling is as, if not more, important as the designs and solutions you come up with. And this is not just through the case studies you write, but also the story you build when you want to present your work. So like 9 out of 10 of the times you're gonna need to create a presentation to, showcase your work during interviews. So when writing my case studies for my portfolio, do you know how many iterations I've had to make to finally find something that worked? Honestly, many times to count. And there are moments I've just finished up redoing my portfolio, and a couple of weeks later, I just do it again, either due to my perfectionism, due to feedback received, or simply due to the fact that I found something that worked in interviews and others that didn't. It's all an iterative process. And during my initial research, just scoping out job descriptions and portfolios, I found that every single designer followed a very, very specific structure when presenting their case studies. So guess what I did? I followed it too. Because in nature, I thought if people working at these big tech companies are following the same structure, then I should be doing the same. If any of you have written case studies for design or like product design projects in the past, you'll very easily recognize the structure. I don't know if you've ever come across this article, but if you haven't, you should really give it a read. It highlights some of the things I had to learn through my failures. And it talks a lot about how boot camps and schools are asking to designers to use the same case study template and the same checklist over and over again to solve design problems, which kind of, after I read it, it kind of related to me a lot because I realized that I was doing the exact same thing as well. This winds up creating a cycle of same case studies across the industry. And this does not just affect bootcamp students, but others out there also looking at portfolios for inspiration. Because it's similar to me, when they see the same template across hundreds of portfolios, they just assume that if other designers are presenting their work in a particular way, then it must be for a reason. And it makes it harder for recruiters to see what makes you stand out when you're actually applying for jobs. So while I'm pretty guilty of having followed some of these templates in the past, the truth is in the real design world, some of these things don't apply to every process when solving a design problem. Like prototypes, I've only ever had to do those when I'm conducting user testing sessions. And I've rarely ever done sketches before real design work. And honestly, there are times where I start with a strategy and dive straight into the high fidelity designs. So the point is, everything you create goes through a process, and every process can be different depending on the problem. So instead of conforming to the status quo, find the story and connect that to your design process. And make sure you really understand why certain steps were made and understand in that process why it was necessary to fulfill that step. Because if you're adding a design process simply to check a box from the case study template, when it comes to the interview process, you will look like you won't understand why a certain process was used. The other thing is, don't be afraid to use your case study and your portfolio to show what is unique about you. Bring in your expertise, your opinions, your personality, your range of skills. If you're coming from an undergrad degree in anthropology, bring all that into your design work because that is what's going to make you stand out. Even if you have unrelated projects like data visualization, graphic design, these can most definitely be displayed through other areas in your portfolio. The program that I did, so it was the media studies program, it was very, very project-based. And through those, I've shown some work that I've done in class in other areas of my portfolio, but they honestly make you stand out. Like surprisingly, there were specifically in your 4th year, if you're in a VMS program, you're going to take a data visualization class. That specific project has honestly made me look like a data-based designer, which is crazy because I'm not. But yeah, it certainly helps you appear as a well-versed designer, so don't shy away from that. Which brings me to lesson number 3, highlight the areas that you are interested in and that makes you, and like those areas that make you a designer. If you are more passionate about research, reflect that through your writing. If it's more visual design work, do that as well. But also with an emphasis in your domain, make sure you cover other areas too. The industry tends to generalize the role of a UX designer, but there are actually multiple streams you can specialize in. Some roles will ask you to focus on an area more than the other, whereas other companies will expect you to work cross-functionally. And this will depend a lot on the size of the company. So for example, in startups, you'll probably find that you'll need to do all the above. This picture is not like the best, because half the time you won't need to do development, but the whole point is in a startup, they may expect you to do all the above, whereas in a bigger company, you might find more specific roles like UX researcher, a product designer focused on design systems, an accessibility inclusive designer, or even a product designer focused on growth, which I think is actually very marketing based. There are various types of product design or UX design. But as a designer, if you're focused on one area, you'll be considered an I-shaped designer. Alternatively, if you're able to collaborate across multiple disciplines, but have a few domains of expertise, then you're between a T-shaped designer and an M-shaped designer. And through your portfolio, I highly encourage you to touch multiple areas of the design process, especially as you start your career. And if you really have one area of strength, really show it. So yeah, as I mentioned, entry-level designers, it'll be key for you to have an idea of multiple disciplines so that you can appear as a cross-functional team player. It will make you stand out to the job process early on. But at the same time, don't shy away from your area of interest. If you're a visually driven designer, highlight that. You want to stand out from the mold that's being built through boot camps. Designers can come in many different shapes and areas of expertise, and it'll be key to highlight who you are through your case studies and portfolio, because many companies actually eye your expertise to know what designer they need on the team based on the gaps that they have. Once you progress in your career, you'll naturally lean towards very specialized areas to focus on. The final lesson is networking can come in different ways. The crazy part of my design career is that I was an oversharer, and I shared my conceptual work everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Dribble, Medium, everywhere. Yes, Instagram to my personal friends. They probably didn't care about it, but it certainly was shown up in there at some point. And because I overshared my unpaid random self-initiated projects, it opened up crazy opportunities that I never thought would happen. My blacktop cabs, for example, that redesign, I had a random agency in Vancouver reach out to me to actually purchase those designs for a ride hailing app that they were building. For tabs, it opened up 2 freelance positions that I did for a few months before taking on my first full-time role. More importantly, your network and friends begin to realize what you're doing that winds up creating other opportunities through referrals and word of mouth. And while those projects were key to the baseline of my portfolio, it wasn't until I shared them publicly where it really made a difference. Projects like these may not be sufficient to some hiring managers, as I showed you in that tweet, but they can definitely open up doors to real life projects and clients that will help strengthen your portfolio in the long term. In addition to sharing your work, connect with design professionals through Slack and Twitter. LinkedIn is not the place for networking with designers in tech. I've actually made the closest design friends and mentors through these platforms. The ones that I'm part of are Vancouver Design Check-in. That was actually created, I believe it was created during COVID. And then the other bigger one is Design X. But you can also look through designerslack.community. You'll find many Slack groups you can join. For Twitter, every designer lives on Twitter. I'm personally not active on there, but I've definitely made a few friends on there. So I highly encourage you to look through that, because it's honestly like one of the most powerful networking tools. So going back to my journey as a product designer, you'll soon begin to notice that the design process is not very far off. That squiggle that I used throughout my presentation is actually referred to as the design squiggle by Damien Newman. And the reason he created this was because a client asked him to show what the value of design was, and he only had 30 seconds to do it. A lot of people agree that this is what the design process looks like, turning chaos and uncertainty into clarity and order through various iteration and learnings along the way. Your career path will be similar to the design process, because all career paths are different, and you'll go through phases where you may need to iterate your portfolio, your resume, or even your story to finally find something that works, that will help you get to where you want to be. So for the takeaways, build marketable skills to frame yourself as a T-shaped designer. Expect to grind before people begin to notice you. Don't let them box you in. Share your story and think of your portfolio as the big picture. Identify the skills you need to demonstrate in your portfolio and prioritize taking steps forward in those areas. And then the final thing is share your work, because I know designers tend to be their own biggest criticizers. Share your work and it will open up opportunities for you. So for the final slide, I actually put together a list of resources that were useful to me. Feel free to check it out. It's a public Notion document. Has a bunch of like books, Slack groups, and then courses as well. But yeah. And then if you want to connect with me, you can as well. That's the end.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Tamara. That was great. It's really nice to see the process from sort of start to finish, and obviously the graphics were really helpful in clarifying how that process started and the confusion in the beginning, and then all the way to hopefully a clear end. But really appreciate the presentation. We'll jump straight into our Q&A. So to everybody in the room, we've had some questions sent to us. We'll get started with those, but you can also send your questions in the chat or jump on your cameras. Anybody wants to turn on their cameras now, please feel free to do that. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand and then we'll unmute you, and then you can ask a question from Tamara. So we'll get started, and again, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question live. So Tamara, we'll get started with this one here. You had the resources, actually, you may have just answered the first question and they were your last slide. The question was, what resources would you recommend for students who are interested in learning UX and want to get into the field but have no UX background? And I think they specify with like graphic design tools, specific programming tools, anything additionally to what you said in the presentation?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're not familiar with Figma, I would encourage you to learn Figma as your starting point. And I believe Figma actually has free resources for that on their website for you to kind of get a hang of it. But on that document that I shared, there is something that I personally didn't learn from Figma, which is building design systems in Figma. Definitely check out. The website is designcode.io. They have a course specifically on how to learn that. In terms of the other things, like for visual design and branding, personally, I've learned those on my own, but I've had friends who've taken like the courses with Super High that have taught them how to, understand visual design and how to really like piece together a structure within in the context of like mobile or web. The way that I did it personally is I just like redesigned a bunch. There's there's a website called UI Daily, and they give you like daily challenges. And if you really want to excel in UI design specifically, that would be the best resource for that. But to learn the process of UX, there's a bunch of free resources out there. Like I think Google actually released a course that will take you through that. And then I know that someone mentioned programming potentially. I took a programming course with Superhigh. It's not mandatory at all, but it certainly made me a better designer because you actually can like understand how things are being built. Again, it's not required, but yeah, it's on that Notion document that I put together.
Great. And would you be able to share the link to the document that you had in your
yes.
presentation in the chat? That would be great. I think everybody would appreciate that. Perfect, link is there. Okay, I'll move on to the next question here. Someone asked, you touched on this a little bit, but we had a few people come and go during the presentation, so I'll ask this again. You did the UBC BMS program. I guess what skills would you say you were able to build through that program to be able to help you with the jump that you made into UX and product design?
Yeah, so I would say media studies, so there's a lot to media studies. You learn actually you take a lot of courses through that program, but I'd say in general, the program teaches you communications, and taking that into my job, you're sort of you're visually communicating a product through the work that you do. So that's like more like an abstract way of thinking about it. But more specifically, I would say that like there's certain courses here and there that actually did help me a lot. One that really, really stuck to me is, I don't know the exact course name, but it was the data visualization course with Richard Arias Hernandez. That is like absolutely it helps me in my current job today, because I'm working on a product that's focused on finance, and I build a lot of charts and like graphs and whatnot. And that course at UBC actually teaches you how to like apply design skills into the charts you build to make them like more effective. So that doesn't really answer like media studies specifically, but yeah, holistically, it helps you really like frame like your visual communication. But at the same time, there are some like little courses that have helped me personally in my current role.
Gotcha. And a couple of people are asking the prof's name, if you could say that again. Or
oh yeah, it's Richard Arias. I can write it.
Richard Arias Hernandez. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's great. No, I think that answers the question well, because it's not a clear transition between the degree to the work that you do. So you have to pick the skills that help you through that process, I guess. So no, that's a great answer, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Question in the chat. How much did your marketing experience help you with your profession now, with the work that you do now? I'm considering going into the UX UI work, but also interested in marketing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, I don't really think in my job today, I don't really think about marketing as much, but in a startup, a product designer in a startup, you definitely think about marketing every now and then, especially if you're designing for websites rather than for like an app. But there are like different domains. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are different domains within product design. Like growth designers focus heavily on actually making design iterations to like grow their user base, which in a way is kind of marketing, but in a more like product oriented like domain. So yeah, I would say it really depends on the type of role. In my, like I said, my previous role, you're really thinking about like how to generate leads through your design. But in my current role, I work for a large company that have like a whole department focusing on that. So I'm more focused on like visual design, right now in UX design rather than like thinking about how to grow the product.
Okay, great. I see, Amala, you have your hand raised. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you to unmute. Feel free to unmute yourself, jump on camera if you like, ask your question, and then I'll mute you after.
Hi, sorry, no camera today. My hair is kind of crazy.
Okay.
My question for you is, I've been really interested in the UX field for about a year, and I was about to, I guess, sign up for a UX boot camp, but was really apprehensive just because it is quite expensive. And my biggest, I guess, fear would be I didn't want to come out as like a cookie cutter sort of like designer. And I've heard with the boot camps, that's typically what happens. And then it becomes really oversaturated because there are a bunch of graduates with basically the same portfolio. And I would like to know, maybe from your experience, if you've even worked with anyone from a boot camp, like, would you say it's beneficial, or would you support me kind of taking a more independent route and teaching myself? Any advice would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so I had one friend take boot camp, and it was actually around the time where I was like self-learning. A lot of what they teach you, you can definitely find the resources online to do it yourself. But I don't mean to like talk badly about boot camps, but they teach you the base to like it certainly teaches you the foundation to, in a way where it's like structured and you learn it in a much like, basically what I'm trying to say, like if you don't have the ability to like really structure your own curriculum, or you have the energy to like do that self-teaching, then, or self-learning, then definitely take the boot camp. But if you're actually committed to learning about UX, then go the self-taught route, because you'll save a lot of money, and you can definitely find the same exact resources as you would in a boot camp. On that same note, I did, like my previous role, they actually create courses, and the way that they build their courses is exactly how I built my self-taught journey, which is look through job postings, find the skills that you need, find the tools that I need to learn, and then just apply that and find the resources online. So that's exactly what boot camps do. So if you're actually able to commit to that journey and do that self-taught path, then definitely go for it. But if you need more structure, then take the boot camp route. But you're not guaranteed a job with a boot camp, as they like sell it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you for the question, Amala. We have a couple more questions coming in the chat. I'm just going to ask a mini follow-up to Amala's question. So there seems to be an in-between to boot camps and self-taught, and that's the courses that you can take, individual courses through like a Coursera or different companies. Do you recommend supplementing some of the skills that you may need through those routes, I guess, instead of going to full boot camp? Would that be considered as part of your self-taught or self-education process?
Yeah, definitely. There's like free Coursera courses as well, or even like more like less expensive courses that you can find online. So the Google one that I've sent you, actually a lot of people have taken that and have said only positive things about that. And I think that covers, like, I would say 50% of boot camp's syllabus, and it's completely free. And then same with Super High's Intro to UI Design. It's also free right now because it's in beta. So they're testing the course out. But yeah, you can definitely take like shorter courses. I have for like to supplement my learning. But yeah, I've personally not like been willing to spend an extra 15K on a boot camp where I can probably spend like, a couple hundred instead.
Right. No, that makes sense. Okay, we'll jump to the chat questions. So first question here, how descriptive do you think someone should be with their design cases for portfolios? I've noticed every design's, I think maybe you're saying designers' portfolio is a bit different in terms of length of their design cases. Some are much shorter and summarized, while some are way more descriptive. Is there one you think a recruiter or interviewer would prefer?
Yeah, so a recruiter looks at like one or two projects and they skim through it. I think there was like a stat that it takes them like a couple minutes to go through your portfolio. But one thing I've learned is through interviews, you're always going to have a design review, and that means going through your portfolio in depth. So don't feel urged to write the full story in your case study, because I know for a fact recruiters don't look at that. But at the same time, because they do that quick scroll through, make your like each section have like a heading that would identify what that section would mean, and tie that in with the design process. Because like while they don't read it and while they may prefer shorter ones, they still want to see that you're not that person that only creates like beautiful like apps instead of like connecting that to like the strategy and the UX, you know. I don't know if that really answered your question, but I've always been encouraged to go shorter rather than longer.
No, I think that helps. Can you still hear me okay and see me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. My Zoom's acting up on the back end here, so that's good. I'll jump to a couple of questions that have been sent us previously, and I'll come back to the chat questions. This one that came in before. So what are some unexpected challenges you face as a woman in tech? And also, what superpowers advantages do you think you have as a woman in technology?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I would say that there was one person I worked with who was actually my manager at the time, who used to make comments about, he used to say it, not me, that people won't value my opinion because I'm a woman in tech, which is crazy. So he made that assumption. So there are going to be a lot of people who will think the same, where it's just like your opinion is less valued. But I mean, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, because just ignore it. Like just be your confident self. At least I have. But what I would say is that because you're cautious, that would make you more, I guess that would be your superpower, because I don't know, like just push that aside, push the negativity aside. I guess the superpower is like, you're used to that. Like you're used to the like people may look down on you because you're that woman in tech.
Right. Has that been, do you find that experience has changed a little bit as you've moved through the ranks, quote unquote, or is it kind of still been similar and you have to push back a little bit more?
No, I think it's definitely changed. I actually, in my previous role, I was one of two women on the team. So that was like when that happened. But now I'm like, obviously not one of two. I don't know how many women there are where I'm currently working, but yeah, it's definitely not the same challenge as it was previously.
Okay. Perfect. I'm looking at more chat questions here. So we have a question. How much is art or creating graphics a part of your UX UI job, or part of a UX UI job? And also, how realistic would it be if I self-learned UX UI while getting a degree not related?
So by creating graphics, you mean like graphic design, right?
I would imagine. Yes.
Yeah. In that case, this would depend on the company again. When you're a startup, there are some occasions where you may be the only designer on the team. If that's the case, there may be an expectation where, let's say you're building the website, but also creating the visuals for it, which is in that case, the graphic design. But when you move into like a larger company, Like
Mhm.
I don't touch graphic design anymore. So it really just depends on the company. Yeah.
Okay, oh, that makes sense. You've sort of answered this in your presentation in a couple of questions, so maybe we can quickly breeze through this one. But do hiring managers actually care about formal certification in product design? I think you said depends on the manager and depends on the company. Was there anything else to add to that piece or no?
For the formal certification, I'd say,
Yeah.
I'll say no. It
Okay.
does help you go through the design training. But your portfolio and the way you present your work matter more. The problem is with certifications is that everyone can get them. And
Right.
but the problem, I guess like the end goal shouldn't be to get the certification. It should be to be the best designer that you can be. Like, don't rush the process just to get the certification. Because listing the certification in your resume won't necessarily make you stand out, but really like hone in on your craft and show that through your work, because that will represent your skill set far more than a random certification that you get.
Okay, no, that's good. That's a great answer. Okay, next question here. How is the UX design in mixed reality, so VR, AR, different from UX for, let's say, mobile apps or web?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've spent a significant time in my previous role actually understanding the differences between the two. But right off the bat, they are very different. Like there's some aspects of like, you know, UX design that you have to think of, but in like the tools that you build or you create your designs with are different. You're like thinking about Spark AR, Unity, Unreal, whatever it is, to actually build those interactions rather than Figma, which is more of a 2D tool. And then at the same time, like you're having to think like interaction wise, like with my phone, I have like this screen, I'm like literally tapping to interact with components, whereas in like VR, you're interacting with those like buttons and stuff in real life. So you're gonna have to think of space and senses and haptics and stuff. So I would say they're very, very different, and I'm absolutely zero expert in that area. But I have listed actually a couple of resources in that list, which is one a book, and then the other one is a course. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check those out.
Okay, that's great. We'll keep going with the questions. And again, if anybody wants to send them in the chat, please do that. Here's a question about, I guess, remote work. What can you tell us about remote working options in UX design? Very interested in UX as a means to achieve digital nomadism. Are many companies open to this arrangement?
Yeah, so you will likely find a role that is remote in UX design. The options are pretty much endless. But again, this all ties back to the company. I've seen some companies that want you in person, but I mean, right now, I'm actually, interestingly enough, I'm the first remote hire on Yahoo Finance specifically. They're all based in New York, and I'm here in Austin just chilling, but there's absolutely like, yeah, you go on LinkedIn, you'll find everyone's open to remote now, especially because of COVID. And I don't think they're gonna move back to that at any point. But in terms of like that whole digital nomadism, the role I worked in previously, which was Circuit Stream, they're a startup based in Calgary. And like if I wanted to go to New Zealand and work from there for like a whole month, they wouldn't care. Whereas at Yahoo, because they're more corporate and they're bigger, there's like so many rules about having to be a citizen of the country to be able to work there remotely. So because of like taxes and whatnot. So like, yes, people are very open to you working remotely, but that travel aspect, I would say it depends on the company's rule.
Got it. Okay. We have someone raising their hands. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. I think it's Shanolo. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, yes, my name is Tinola. Thank you.
Tinola.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Hi, Rem. Thank you so much, Tamara. Thank you so much for giving us your time and like speaking with us today. So I actually am part of the Vancouver design check-in through another designer. I happened to meet her through LinkedIn, which is funny that you mentioned that LinkedIn is kind of hard to navigate through, I guess. And
that's cool.
yeah, I guess my main question would be that from the point where you decided, because I'm pretty much in the same shoes that you were in, and I guess a lot of people here are in currently, where I am I'm not necessarily in a design degree, but I am interested in UX design. And, I've been speaking with a lot of designers in the past, but something that I've been really curious about is how long it took from the point that you, I guess, realized that you wanted to do UX design and the point that you actually were getting jobs and you were like, you were getting professional experience in that,
Yeah.
in the field.
Yeah. So the point where I wanted to switch over was like right like the summer before my 4th year. So I basically had like 8 months before I graduated. And then I'd say like within that year, I really focused on like my portfolio, my skills and whatnot. But tying back to like, I shared those random projects I built on like through social media and through my friends and like the connections I made at UBC, surprisingly, they referred me to contract positions and freelance positions for like real companies to actually work on their products. So that was like, in terms of timeline, that was right when I graduated. And those projects were super short that I was able to put them into my case study and then start applying for like, I guess, real jobs. And shortly after I was able to get interviews. But honestly, like even just like thinking about like going back to like my timeline, there's one course at UBC actually, it's a human computer interaction course. And I think they made us like work on a redesign for Yelp. And I used that plus my blacktop cabs. And I started interviewing for jobs just for fun. Applying for jobs just for fun. And I did surprisingly get interviews, but it took me a while to actually figure out how to sell myself and tell my story before I landed a role. But yeah, like it won't take long. The first offer I got was I'd say in like May or something, before I graduated, and it was in Germany, so I didn't take it. And then the one after that was like a couple months later or something like that. So did that answer your question?
It did answer my question. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your question. We have one more that just came in through the chat, and we've had a different sort of version of this question multiple times. So I'll ask this here, and I'm sorry if I'm looking down. My Zoom is completely frozen, so I'm trying to get the questions through my phone. So I'm just looking down here. I guess this is the perils of coming back to the office and figuring out the Wi-Fi. How would you recommend people starting out in UX UI to stand out and be more competitive, given how competitive the industry is? You talked about what you did. Any specific recommendations? And maybe I'll attach it to one of my questions or questions that have come in before. Maybe a top 3 strengths that you would recommend to stand out and build your way through the industry.
Yeah, I would say, as I'll answer your second question first, the top 3 skills I'd say is willingness to learn, especially as like an entry level, ability to work cross-functionally, and then being open to feedback and being really like vocal, ask questions. And then how you would stand out. I touched a lot on that, like through my process, which is like through your portfolio, really show yourself, be unique. But like the first thing people are going to see, like when you apply for jobs, first thing people are going to see is your resume and your portfolio. And if they just see like a really, really basic portfolio with no like, nothing like, no personal touch, then it's like, what would make me appeal? Why would I want to like communicate with you? Like you want to add some flavor to like who you are, add like personality. There's like, that would actually make you stand out, aside from like all that project work that I talked about in the presentation. There's actually actually let me just link it, I'll find it. There's this one guy whose portfolio stands out to me. He's not even a product designer, he's a marketer, and he has his about page is just like makes me want to talk to him. You should check it out. He actually works at Figma as like a marketing person there.
Okay, cool. And I'm guessing you're sending that in the chat.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I see nothing at this point, so I'll take your word for it. Okay, we'll keep moving on through the questions here. So you talked a little bit about networking, and you said LinkedIn wasn't exactly the best tool for networking in this industry. You talked about Twitter and Slack. I guess what I'll ask specifically is, what have you found the disadvantages for LinkedIn? And then what has worked in your process of doing outreach to connect to people through Slack or Twitter? Have you been able to ask for coffee chats? Have you just been able to share your portfolio? What has been your process for that networking piece?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say LinkedIn is a disadvantage. I would just say that I've seen more Silicon Valley based designers live on Twitter than I have on LinkedIn. But I guess the biggest pro about LinkedIn is the virality that comes with like, if I like your post, your network will see it and so on, like, which is why I really leverage that to share my projects. But for connecting with people, I mean, for Twitter, a lot of people share really like Twitter is like a resource to me. Like it's like people share their knowledge about the industry, about design, but occasionally you'll see like random tweets here and there about their personal life. But in the end, just like responding to those tweets is how I made connections. And almost all people I know who, at least those in like North America, have actually like found their roles through Twitter or through Slack. I wasn't one of them, but I did have those connections to be able, like, if I wanted to, I could have like reached out, but I just didn't. But like, I'm just like, the whole point is like, they're all there. Twitter, every designer I know is on there. So really like connect with the, like there is an endless possibility to connect with those people on there. But yeah, for me, I just like, honestly, just, I've never personally reached out to people to like have a chat with, which is very strange because I'm very like to myself, but I have definitely like talked to people like through just like DMs.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, no, that's great. Okay, we'll go on. Oh, we had a little follow-up here. Can you recommend some designers to follow on Twitter?
Yeah, there's, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone in particular, but there is Femke, Femke. She's I think she's a designer at Wealth Simple right now. There's yeah, I honestly, like, I need to like go through my list of people, but there are definitely a lot of people that, I mean, I can add it to the resources list if you want. There's one called, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
There was another one, Yam, she currently works at a startup now, but she was in Microsoft before that. She's based out of San Francisco. She's also a great person to connect with. Yeah, there's one guy I connect with on a daily basis today. I don't think he's active on Twitter, surprisingly. But his name is Hani, Hany. And he's really focused in the like product strategy space rather than product design. So he's like all about design sprints and whatnot.
Okay, great. This is an interesting question. What has surprised you the most about your current role? So not so much about UX itself, but the current role that you have.
Yeah. So when I resigned from my previous role at a startup, I think one of the things that the founders were trying to like convince me was, oh, like at a large corporation, you're going to be a tiny fish. Like we can frog leap your career here. But honestly, surprisingly, like despite Yahoo being pretty big, I'm one of 2 designers on the native team. So I sort of expected to be a tiny fish amongst a large group of designers. But yeah, my current role, I actually feel like I have impact. So yeah, that was a surprise to me.
Did you find, coming from a startup, did you find that your role was more streamlined? Like the difference between an established, let's say, big size company like Yahoo versus a startup, did you wear many more hats in your role in the startup versus Yahoo? Okay.
Oh yeah, I wore like I would tell them that I'm the miscellaneous floater. I would do like UX design and then like 50 other things. So yeah, I'm definitely my role right now is way more streamlined, and I'm really focused on like the craft of like product design rather than having to worry about all the other things that happen behind the scenes.
The typical startup life.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we'll keep moving on here. I want to see. Okay, this one's about work-life balance. What advice would you give to new grads who are starting their full-time jobs regarding work-life balance as a designer or UX designer? And how have you managed that in your personal work life?
Yeah, so truthfully, my work-life balance right now at the moment doesn't exist because I'm still contracting for that startup I used to work for. So I'm like dabbling like 2 roles. But I'd say that most UX designers have a great work-life balance. But again, it would depend on the company you work for. If you're a design team of 1 at a startup, you may be you're gonna have to hustle. There are times where you're gonna have to work past 5 p.m. To get that one thing done before like launch day. Versus being on a larger team, like things are a lot less fast-paced. I feel like if I didn't have that contract role, I'd end at 5 and chill out, you know. But what I used to do at the startup is I actually used to dedicate like reading time. So like right at 5, I'd go out and like read for 30 minutes, and then that would cut me off from, work. And especially because you're remote, like you feel like there's no disconnect between like, when do I sign off?
Right.
So like, just like encouraging yourself to do other, like walk your dog, you know, like do things that will like break that, and then go on, have dinner with your friends or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's that. So unless you're doing multiple things or multiple jobs, work-life balance is pretty attainable in a UX role.
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question here. What helps you overcome challenges? How did you know when it was time to make the transition in your career path? And I guess this would be education path, career path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, for me, what really made me realize that I needed to transition was there was like within 2 weeks, I attended 2 different conferences. One was a branding / marketing related one. The other one was like a UX design based conference. And I was far more interested in UX design talks than I was marketing. So I was like, yep, like that's it. Like this is for me. It's interesting because like at the time I used to call myself like digital marketer / like UX designer, but then right after I was like, nope, like I don't think this is like it. But yeah, I guess like what helps me overcome challenges, just, you know, talking to people, reading things online. I think that's like the only thing that helped me personally. And and just doing research, just figuring out what was needed.
Okay, great. I think we have a raised hand from Mandy. We'll unmute you if you can ask your question. That would be great.
Hello?
Perfect, we can hear you.
Hi, Tamara. Thank you so much for your presentation. Like, it's one of the best I've ever heard, and you're just so incredibly resourceful, and you're such a clear communicator. So, and I think a large part of like why your presentation I think is so successful is because you're such a recent graduate, and I feel like you really spoke to like so many of my own worries and thoughts as also like a fourth year student about to graduate. And my question is, as a very future oriented thinker myself, I'm curious, like from where you are right now, you sort of like made it, you've like gone through the hurdles of self-educating, and then you've gotten this role where you can further your education and you sort of have a foothold into the industry. I'm wondering, where do you see yourself in a few years? Like, what are you excited about now, and what are you looking forward to learning about more?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. I think like one of my biggest challenges at a startup was the fact that because I came from that self-taught path, I really wanted to like get into a role where I was really focused on like UX and product design and like growing in that area. And now that I have it, it's just like, okay, like where do I want to go? Do I want to go like the like individual contributor route and just like really like dive into like the craft of UX design, or do I want to go the manager route? At this point, I still don't know, but now that I've like, I guess, gained the foundation of like product design, I've been far more interested in exploring like the specialties I can dive into. And I've really been leaning towards like product strategy. So I find myself like right in the middle of like product management and product design, because like I apply a lot of like business thinking into design. But at the same time, I'm also really, really interested in like applying inclusive and accessible design into like my like work. And that takes a lot of effort because not a lot of designers are really wary of that. So yeah, I'm still sort of figuring it out myself. But yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Manny.
Like a follow-up, just a mini,
Yeah.
like, have you thought about like, I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but like dark design or
Oh, yeah.
Unethical design, sort of like from Social Dilemma documentary.
Dark. Yeah, I think about it on a day-to-day basis. There are so many, like, you're gonna work with people who are gonna suggest it purely for revenue reasons. But yeah, it's crazy. You'll be surprised that it comes up every now and then. But yeah, I try to be as ethical as possible in the work that I do. Thankfully, I work in finance, and it's just like, oh, people are just reading stats on like the stock market, so it's not really like too unethical, I guess. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
The subject of challenge came up a little bit, and you talked about that a bit. What would you consider as the toughest challenge you faced so far throughout your career?
I'd say breaking into the industry. Yeah, because it did, like, I mean, I'd say it took a while, but it didn't. In my mind, I think it took a while because it was like that year of me learning. But it's just like that doubt and the like imposter syndrome that you go through while going through that. But yeah, I would say like breaking into the industry and actually like finding your place was my biggest challenge, at least.
Great. I'll move on to the next question here. Someone's asked, what advice did you get early on in your career that made the most impact for you? And I guess that could be from a person or something you read through a resource.
Yeah. So my manager, a couple years ago, I would say that's early on in my career, mentioned to me that my work is amazing, but the way I present it is not like, it kind of like makes it seem like less great because I'm not as confident. And I think that comes with being a designer, because you're like wanting to hear what people think to change your designs. But I think from that, like I've learned to be more confident when I present my work. And unfortunately, presenting work is going to be part of your day-to-day as a designer. So yeah, I guess that was the advice that made the most impact to me.
So how would you, as a little follow-up on that, how would you handle criticism or constructive criticism of the work, especially since, you know, it's your work, it's your design, and how do you go about managing that piece?
Yeah, I think like, honestly, like you're gonna have to learn to live with the criticism. Thankfully, the people I've worked with in the past have not been rude about that. It's always been like constructive and like really good feedback that I've just, you know, used to improve the work. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, just like, I think as a designer, you're gonna have to learn to get used to hearing people change I mean, there are tons of memes out there for like designers in general, even graphic designers, like showing your client the work and then like asking you to change it a billion times. So that same thing applies here. You're just gonna have to like get used to it.
Okay, no, that's good advice and fair enough. There was a question about what advice do you have for students to adapt to a new environment when they move to a different city or country? Since obviously you worked and studied in Vancouver and then now in Austin, what is your advice in terms of a scenery change like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had an unfair advantage when I moved to Austin because I've been visiting Austin for like, I would say 6 years before officially making the move. But it's not like I have like a large group of friends as I did in Vancouver. So I would say like from a professional standpoint, I've again used Slack to like connect with local designers here. But from a personal level, I would say just like, you know, explore the city and actually like learn the differences between like where you've lived in the past. Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple more questions. So if anybody else has any questions in the group or in the chat, please send it in, raise your hand. Otherwise, we have a couple more to go through here. Someone said, I'm also interested in UX. What is some career advice that you wish you knew when you were still a student at UBC?
Yeah, I'd say that my involvement in school, like at UBC, has helped me like connect with people for like real jobs. So I would have taken networking at university more seriously because of the opportunities that fell on my lap with the few that I've made. But also I think like what I would do is get over my introverted side and actually, as you said, connect with like people in the industry and learn from them, because I didn't do that. I was always too scared to ask for feedback about my portfolio or like just have a general conversation. I think like you actually, people are willing to help, you know. And that's something I would have definitely changed.
Right. And I think that's something we always mention to students is the networking piece, regardless of the types of careers that we have on office hours and shifts and anything else, networking is the key thing that comes up in every conversation. So that's really good to hear from your end as well. I think we are done with our questions. So we have one final one, and then we'll wrap the event there. So before we finish, I wanted to ask you, what is the most important takeaway that you would like our audience to leave with today?
Start working on your portfolio. That's literally like the most important part. Yeah, just like really work on your skills, even if it's like redesigning stuff, like that's how you're going to start, learning.
Okay. And would you say, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but it's a continuous process where you have your portfolio and you're always, but it's an always learning process then?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. You obviously saw the messages in the chat. So many people appreciate. Oh, I think we have one more raised hand. All right, I'll ask one more question. I think Amala has raised her hand. So we'll unmute you if you want to ask your question. If you're still there.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was talking to myself apparently.
Oh, okay.
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. My question is that at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that you do mentorship and you like to connect with newer designers. What would be the best platform to kind of get in contact with you for like little information sessions or even just advice, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, you can connect with me on the platform that UBC actually uses, which is 10,000 Coffees, right? Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is just / then my full name. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay. And on that noble wrap, thank you again for the presentation. Thank you everybody for all of your questions. It's great that you've also sent the link with the resources. Everybody can go through all the information that Tamara has provided. We're going to send a link in the chat right now with a survey. We'd really appreciate it if everybody in the room takes a couple of minutes to go through the survey and just let us know what you thought of the event, what worked, what didn't work. It'll really help us shape our future events, the kind of speakers that we'll bring on, and just for all the rest of the work that we do at the CSINC. Again, thank you so much, Tamara, and thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and afternoon, and we will talk later.
Thank you.
Take care.